And I know that there's somebody in here that's gonna have, or should have, a certain question. I just want to see if anybody's gonna ask before I just go
I have
ahead
a
and say.
different question. So, the small parts, when you're very end grain that's charred. Something this small or smaller, how do you get it off without running the corners?
See, that's one of those questions I was hoping that folks were gonna ask. How to get the chart. Now, Ryland had mentioned that he uses that eraser.
He uses a Stadler drafting eraser. It's a plastic eraser.
You got it working.
Well,
Now, I've tried it. Hadn't worked for me, but that's the beauty of doing one of these.
Ryland,
Different things work for different people.
Ryland could speak to that. I tried it, but I tried it on a piece where I already sanded. The key is what Ryland described at the Hampton Roads meeting was that when you start sanding it, you're going to get very fine powder. The powder gets into the wood. Once the powder's in the wood, you could sand and sand and sand. It's there. Okay. The eraser only works if you get to it before you do anything to it. Right? Am I right, Ryland?
Erasers, we're saying, yeah.
That's correct, because once you sand and then seal it, and if you don't get that dirty dust out, it's there permanently.
All right, so
So I'm sorry, just to give you one more choice, I scrape it off with a razor blade.
yes, you can do that with a razor too.
Makes sense?
Now, I am a big proponent of sandpaper though. So I want to show you how I do it. Okay, and the things that I've noticed in watching a lot of people is the sandpaper that they choose. Now, my go-to for removing char on any pieces is 320 grit or higher, 320 or 400 grit sandpaper, and clean. The key is clean. Is it expensive? Yes. I go through a crap ton of sandpaper when I'm removing char, and it's just a fact of life with the kids today.
What size you use again?
320 or 400. Okay, depending on the piece or the type of wood, like if it's cherry or but for cedar, I find that 320 works well. So I just propped out these wheels. So there's a bunch of ways that you can do this. Now, I've seen people stick these wheels on a Dremel, right? On the shaft of a Dremel, and then turn the Dremel on and just stick sandpaper here. And it comes out beautiful, nice and clean. The only problem is the wheel is like 30% too small at that. Okay, and there's no rhyme or reason you can't really keep it consistent size across, let's say 40 Canon, and now all your Canon are lopsided. So I tried not to use any power tools, machine tools at all. I just do it by hand. And yes, you can hold these with something if you have a problem holding them. But my secret to sanding char with this paper is like not even to use a sanding stick. And you're not going to have your fingers, see the finger on the char? See that? You're not going to sand this way because you're pushing too much. And like Tom said, you're now going to be pushing the char dirt into the wood that way. So if you just move, see how I have it folded? Right, just a little stiffer, and there's some resistance there. So if you just move it away, and then and does it take a long time? Does it
Sorry.
Does it take a long time to do? Yeah, and you can see it's just the pressure.
What are you, 320?
320 or sometimes 400, and I'll maybe have enough to do.
Does the wet sandpaper work better?
Nah, because that's just going to turn to mud, and that's not going to be good at all, right? And I just take my time. Never does my finger on it, and you're just removing that. And I did all of these just yesterday with this, and they're all still round. They're not rounded. There might be a little rounded. Okay, I mean you can't avoid that. Yeah, and if I had my goggles on and I was really that day not impatient, you could do a really good job. Now, if the grain when you're sanding anything, if you're sanding end grain, you know, when you stain an end grain, it's a lot darker than the other parts of it. So even putting white on poly, you take all this time to take off the char, and then you go to put your white on poly on it. And no matter what you do, you get a real dark spot. So I never put poly on end grain, ever. Or if I poly this wheel, what I'll then do is go back with the sandpaper and lighten it up again. And so all the wheels and all the parts on my models that would have end grain showing rather than have dark spot, I just sand it and let the humidity and the air get at it so that the color then matches the other wood better. It's never going to be perfect.
It's still all.
When you paint them, do you need to get that shit off?
Well, no, you don't need to get the char off. It depends, Rich. The laser,
Base color will do it.
yeah, it depends on the paint color, but the laser shoots a laser down a million times. And if you look real close, it's ridges. Okay, so you gotta sand it a little bit, but it doesn't have to be completely clean. But some colors are notorious for bleed through. Red is one of them. It's very hard to paint with red unless you gunk it on. You'll be able to see pencil lines through it unless you do a million coats with it. Right? So I happen to like that because I think it looks weathered and it, you know, you don't want to overdo it, but you want some dark spots in it. But like for the gun ports, if you look at the gun port, for anybody that didn't sand any of it, and now you got black ports on these, what I do, and I mentioned it to somebody in the group chat, is I will first paint it with a yellow ochre white color, which is very opaque because titanium white is very opaque paint. And that will cover all of that. And then you'll be able to cover it with the red without any worry that it's just going to be too dark or have bleed through.
But what color do you use primarily?
Titanium white with just a little bit of yellow ochre so it's not so light, so that it'll match the same shade of red as with the rest of the wood that doesn't have the
Want to be
charm.
opaque and ideally the same value.
Yeah. Any questions with that?
When you sand the wheel, I noticed, should you like sand go up, sand, you don't go back and forth, or would you put that, would it put the dirt inside the thing, because you were saying.
If you just have a light touch and you're not impatient, like some people will use 100 grit paper, you know, on their pieces, and it's all scratched to shit when they're done, and they're wondering, well, oh, that's a mess. And then it'll stain too dark. If you have patience and you're not worried about that it's a race,
And should you go perpendicular to the wheel? or
doesn't
parallel?
matter. Like I'll even sometimes do this. Like if I start to get a little round off, I'll just lightly do this, and you can see how clean that is. And the moment that this gets dirty, this sandpaper, I chuck it. So I have a mound and they're always little pieces like this.
I have a stupid hack for dirty sandpaper, if I could have your dirty pieces.
Well, I do this.
I just,
I wiped all my
t-shirt, you wear a
jeans.
con
T-shirt, go right down.
90%
Yeah,
of it.
I do this. And the same for these things, like this, see
You
how that?
also have those rubber sticks.
Just,
Do that.
for myself, I went down a different route to get the small things, standing blocks, and because I had to do so much extra cutting on this, I had 3 grits, so. 228, where I'm gonna just waste away stuff.
Right.
Or I couldn't get a chisel in, but I could get sandpaper in. 320 and 400 or 500, I can't remember. I will say that I can see the works of 320 on wood, if you're looking for it. So, you know, if that bothers you, then go higher.
I've done
It's
like
more work.
400.
Yeah, I don't ever go that high, but like he says, I usually do 320 and then I'll go to 400 and that's it for me.
And then I'll also make sure that when I'm using that block, I let that make sure that I'm perpendicular. I may rotate it slightly so that my doesn't
Right.
rotate or.
See, I don't know if my hands are just that steady or what, but I just eyeball it and I don't worry about roundness or I don't try not to sweat the small stuff, you know.
And what kind of paint are you using and do you thin it?
Did I bring the paint? It's just from a tube. It's literally acrylic paint from a tube and I squeeze it out and have the brush and then because I could, not with a wet palette or anything like that, not fancy. so that I could dip the brush in water and then work the paint to a thin enough solution that works for me.
And I'm guessing that's somewhere between water and milk, all goes for milk.
Yeah, probably closer to milk.
Alright, so you don't just do it right from the tube, you do.
No,
thin it out.
No, and that's one of the big mistakes. You don't want to have any brush strokes or anything
'Cause I
like
try to
that.
airbrush it, but those like send those pieces flying.
Yeah, no, and
There are
literally,
ways to get around that too, though, like, double-sided tape,
Which
Right.
works on one side, but
right, and then
then.
when you're done and it's all dry, you can flip it over, but the paint has to have cured, be done.
Got it,
Not in 10 minutes, but maybe a couple minutes.
okay,
now,
okay.
again, I've said this to a million people, is slow down and don't be impatient. I don't know why people think building a model is a race. It's crazy, you know? And
We were given a month to get to you.
yeah, you see all these pieces lined up?
This morning, what do you think I was doing?
So I will line them up like this and I'll hold it in my finger and I will paint the tops of the sides and then put it down. And then by the time I get all the pieces done, this first one's dry so that I can flip it and do the other side. And I'm doing multiple coats and building it up, and I will sand it at least once in between coats.
And artist acrylic, because you're saying the two.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which isn't that far off.
Really
from
sucks.
But it's
Yeah.
nice, it's a nice.
Is
Yeah,
that the lead
Hold on,
tube or the tin tube or whatever?
yeah.
As well.
I order it from Utrecht, they're Utrecht acrylic
Okay.
paints I'm using.
Okay.
If you go to their store, north of here, it's cheaper.
They put me on a CPAP machine.
You're near to it.
Okay, so,
Right.
so now that you got all your parts done and you can start to build your jig, and you
Anyway.
can see it's a very
The
simple
other
jig.
thing, the
right?
other thing is.
So just
I
pop
had a
out the
chronic
pieces,
cough.
and what you wanna do
Okay.
is,
I
and
was
you can
in
see the
Europe for 3
picture
weeks.
is on
I
the
didn't
base,
cough
right?
once.
So that makes it easier, but most people are just gonna, they're just gonna glue everything on and it's just not gonna work. Now, you do wanna take off just a little nub where it's held into the wood, so it's smooth.
Because worse than that, it would definitely kind of work.
Yeah, it'll definitely kind of work. And let me see if I can do this. So what you're gonna do is just take a little CA, because it don't matter, and just put a dab in there. Right, and you wanna put the middle piece, the biggest piece in first. And without sanding any char off or anything like that, just kind of, I don't have my goggles on, but it doesn't matter for this. All right, and then let that dry. Now you can see that there's these two small pieces in here that are next, right? And these are for the front and the back, right? And there's a place to glue those down, but you don't want to glue those down yet, because what you want to do is after this dries, you want to take your axle and you want to stick your axle in there. And then glue the piece on the back. Taking care not to glue your axle on, and you don't need a lot of glue. You
And
just,
use thicker stuff, not the
it doesn't matter.
fun stuff.
Because what you're trying to do is you're trying to establish,
And how snug?
you're trying to establish a press fit. Now, what's a press fit? Well, you don't want to be able to turn it over and have it fall out. Okay, but you don't want it so tight that when you push it in there, the axle, that it's gonna really scratch up or dent, or that it's too tight. Because then you won't be able to get your carriage off. Okay, so you're gonna then repeat that process with now the axles are different. There's a large axle for the rear, and there's a slightly shorter one for the front of the carriage. And their width is a little different as well. Okay, following historical preference. They're not identical. So make sure when you're doing this, you're using the appropriate axle, which is also laser etched onto the jig. Okay, so now once that's done and you got both sides on and you have a press fit, that's when you put the last remaining piece of the jig on, which just goes on the front side, right on top of the little piece. Okay, flush. So that's it. And so And the reason why you're doing that is to establish that you're gonna have a press fit on the jig. So now I'm gonna, let's see, big one, small one.
He follows his own advice.
So what you can see is now if you've done all these consistently or somewhat consistently, when you put these in there, they're gonna be a nice press fit in there.
Now you see the advantage of Chuck's labeling system.
Yeah, well. Oops, still the wrong ones. And you just want to use those etched references that are on there to kind of just center it in the jig. Okay, so then make sure. So now your axles are in here, and they're not going to stay glued in. Then you're going to have your size of your carriage. Or these are called brackets. Is what they call them. And I like to put a little dab, and yeah, I use CA for this stuff. I know people are like, gotta use the PVA. I can't, God forbid.
I glue.
No museum's ever gonna like your work if you're using CA. And I just put a little dot on there.
No museum likes my work. It has nothing to do with the CA.
And if you put this piece on, this tall piece sticking up, that's gonna create the width for them. And if you notice, and again, I don't have my goggles on, but
Also keeps it upright 90 degrees.
it keeps it 90 degrees. And
What are you gluing out to the axles?
you're gluing it right to the axles, which are going to stick out onto the top of the axles. And
The only thing you wanted to glue to, otherwise you're gluing the jig.
and then you just make sure you push so that they're sitting flush against everything, and you're done. Okay. Now you're going to wait for that to set, which is if you use PVA would take a little bit longer. And you don't want to use so much glue that, like I said, you're going to risk gluing this thing in here. And when you have, trust me, when you got 100 of these or 30 of these or even a dozen of these, it sucks making canny carriages. And it's this first half because this makes everything nice and symmetrical so that all these other parts can go in there properly. Okay, so then when it dries, I take a toothpick and I just put it under the axle. Hopefully one that's got a point on it.
And no glue.
And no glue. And then you just pop it out that and you pop out, put back this. And out it comes, and you could do the next one. And then you'll just have a whole bunch of them like this. So I say you sacrifice the first one. It's not really a sacrifice. You could still use it, but this is why I prepare everything up front for these things. Okay. Now the rest is pretty self-explanatory in the instructions. I was kind of very detailed about how to build it. I hope. So read them. And just skim through them. But there's also a couple of things that I wanted to point out for carriages. And if anybody has any questions about what I've said up to this point. Anyone? Okay. So the axles. How many people have seen some really weird, wacky methods that people use to round off the edge of laser cut axles, right? Because they're square and they're not a perfect square, right? These axles, they're because it's longer than it is thicker for the piece. So you can't simply put it in a Dremel. They got things with holes they put in it. And again, it's just, that's too much work for me. And I guess call me old school, but I like to do everything by hand. So I utilize what's in front of me. So I have a wheel, right? I'll take where's my blade? Did I leave it over there? I'll simply do these assembly line style. You guys ain't gonna be able to see this online, but I'll do a stop cut. And then on the corners, I'll just come down a little bit, right?
Oh, that's right. Cool.
And just make them octagon, like so. All the way around down to, and then I go this way, and you see I'm not really being that careful because these are a little oversized. And then I'll use the sanding stick, right? And I will simply, very lightly, just round it off, but not, basically, I'm just taking off the char when I'm doing this and trying to round it off somewhat. And I'm not going crazy though. And everybody's gonna say, well, that looks horrible. That's not even round. That's kind of like oval. Right? I'll even do the end, get the char off. Well, when you're using a soft wood like basswood or cedar on these, there's a benefit to it, even though people are always, I want boxwood or pear. You take your truck, your wheel, and you just stick it on there. And you just do this twist all the way down so it sits in, and it basically crushes and molds that wood into a pretty much a perfect circle.
Interesting. I was always afraid to do that. I was afraid the tip would come off.
Yeah.
If I did that, I thought of that.
If you're not perpendicular, you can do that.
You can do that. I mean, but you should be able to feel that when it's about to happen, and then you should know, don't do that. Back it off and maybe
And
sand a
honestly,
little
if you
bit.
do make that mistake, take the wheel off, straighten out the fiber, maybe adopt
Right.
CAA and try it.
So when you guys go home and build your carriage, you only need to build one. You don't have to build them both, but I gave you two in case you screw up a part or something. You're gonna put on your wheel and you're gonna look on the axle, and I'll pass this around. There's a little hole. This way, we should build it. For
Oh, yeah.
the pin that goes in the axle. So when you push that wheel in, you want to make sure you expose that hole in the axle so you can actually insert the pin later. If it doesn't go in enough, you got to either sand your wheel down a little bit thinner or make your axle a little thinner. Otherwise, you're going to have a problem getting that pin in there for the wheel. Okay.
I'd say I skip the sandpaper. I just use the.
Yeah, we could do that too.
Sideways.
Yeah.
Scrape it off.
But same principle. So I've seen people do some really wacky stuff with it. They think it's gonna take too long. If it's not a race and you're willing to take your time, it takes a long time. It probably took me an hour to do all these parts, sand them properly and so forth. Okay, one last thing is I got my Canon, right? My 3D printed Canon. And by the way, these carriages, it's the bracket that holds the weight of the carriage. None of the stuff on the inside. The Canon won't even touch any of the Canon beds that are on the inside or any of your metal pins. It's literally the two carriage brackets that the Canon sits on. It really doesn't touch it anywhere else in the front or in the back except for the coin, which adjusts the elevation. Okay, so the Tom, what's it called? The pin in the Canon. I got a pin. The trunnion. Trunnions are long. That's done by design. So after you have it, you kind of do a dry fit on top of your carriage, mark it, get a clippers or sand them so they're flush. And then I have laser cut trunnion caps in the kit. Okay, and they're kind of 3D. And now I've heard from people who have used these for their cannons, and they say, oh, they don't fit. They don't slide over the trunnion. This is too small, right? In this piece. I said, I can't get the trunnion pins to sit flush on top of the carriage. Well, there's a reason for that. And I can't believe that folks could not figure out what the solution is what you want to do is you want to sand file, get a round file, and just make these indents for the trunnion deeper, lower it, okay? Because that was done on purpose by design for the laser cutting. So that's not overdone if folks sand it, so that the trunnion sits deeper into that hole. And then you will be able to put these trunnion caps on there, no problem at all. They just glue right on instead of using card or metal. Okay.
50% goes in the bracket, 50% goes in the cap.
Actually, a little bit lower.
Yeah.
Than 50%.
Yeah.
Okay, so
So this model did 50%.
that one, actually, no, it's not really. It isn't, and you kind of have to, otherwise it won't. It's just slightly lower than that.
Themselves.
Chuck, this is so precise. The question is, does the gun really fire?
No, only Ozzy's version would have fired. And that's it for building carriage. So that's your homework, to go home and finish them up. I have to go home and finish these four, because this is for my actual full hull. If anybody has any questions at all.
Yeah, on the color, the red. Did they have that vibrant red color back then? Was it a little more brown?
You know, it's personal choice, so you could definitely go more brown, and what I've done in the past, I did not do it for this particular model. Is rather than go darker or muddier, browner, which a lot of people like,
More
it's
red.
it's red oxide, it's too uniform for me.
I used the same red that we used on the Medway.
Yeah, but that's the same one, this is crimson right out of the tube. And that's a little much, so, but I don't like it also darker too even. So when I'm done painting any of my pieces, I'll take some rust or brown weathering powder and go over my bulwarks with it, or my carriages, but not so evenly that it looks like it was completely done, but just enough to tone it down. And it's just something to try. But yeah, you pick whatever color you like. It's your model, you know?
And they're all different, because when they painted these things, they didn't store paint on the ship. They stored linseed oil and stuff to mix it with. So the colors could be all over the place.
They're gonna be cheap colors, and they're the colors that you already know. So the ones that are expensive and not color fast, you're not gonna get it. I mean, maybe some of the really identified ones a bit earlier than this, but this kind of stuff is just very dry. So
When you sand
it'll
between
be on the
coats,
sense entirely.
like, because I've used steel wool, and like, how many?
Yeah, I don't, because I don't like when the little bits of steel break off. So I literally do 400,
Okay.
and I'll just, if you taking the paint off, you're
You
taking
just
too
try to
much
like
off.
get where the wood swell.
Where the wood swelled a little bit, and you're basically sanding the paint versus sanding. Rylan and I did a nice painting lesson demonstration once. We should do that here,
Yeah.
where everybody practice on some wood. When I was in college, I had a teacher, it was an entire 4 weeks on how to paint swatches of every color by hand with a brush. And if you showed any brush strokes after you finished painting with acrylic or oil, she'd flunk you.
Wow.
So you had to learn how to paint without showing any brush strokes or anything.
This is before or after sandpaper?
Yeah, no sand, but right on canvas, on paper, it was the worst class I ever took, but now I appreciate it more than anything else, honestly. You know, that it was kind of interesting.
That's why I always airbrush, because I just don't like the brush strokes.
Yeah, you well, it's not difficult to paint. But again,
Yes.
it's a timing thing. People who aren't willing to spend the time that they need to spend on something inevitably are gonna just gunk out the paint, and they're gonna dip the brush in, and they're gonna go to work on it, and they're gonna get all out of the lines. And you're gonna see all the brush strokes, and if you just take your time, like, I can't tell you how long it took me to just prepare for today and sand and paint all these parts that you see here. I mean, it took like a good 4 hours, 4.5 hours to do that.
4 hours for that.
For these parts right here, it took a good 4 hours to sand the char off to my liking, paint them, wait for them to dry, and get those done. And that's with a lot of shortcuts, you know, with laser cut parts and laser etched things. So making cannon or it's carriages is brutal. It's just brutal when you got more than one. We only have one. So I would ask that you guys take your time with the one that you have to build this time, and don't rush through it. So ask me any questions about how to paint it, how to prepare anything. Take your time. You'll see a
And how do you
huge
get more
difference.
time, sir?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, thank you, Chuck.
You're welcome.
That was excellent.
I know it was hard for the folks online to see all this, but
Oh, it worked well. It worked well.
okay, it's really hard to write all this stuff. That's why you need to be together and see it demo.
Okay,
It was excellent camera work on an
Yep.
excellent presentation.
okay, I'm gonna stop the recording and start again, so don't panic online.
Ask Tom. Just ask Tom.